All right.
Hey,
let's do this. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Wilderness Torah Shmita Slowdown series. Thank you for joining us online today. In this series, we're exploring the power of Shmita through live conversations with change makers across the Jewish world. Shmita, which means release in Hebrew, is the last year of the 7-year cycle where the Jewish people are instructed to release the land, debt, and those in servitude. And today, this is a cultural opportunity for us to rest, to renew, and transform. At Wilderness Torah, we're using this Shmita Year to really take stock, clarify our purpose, and start designing and the building process for the Center for Earth-Based Judaism. So we're thrilled to host this series of episodes as a way to share diverse voices and perspectives on the topic. My name is Robert Friedman. I'm the Director of Marketing at Wilderness Torah. And I'm thrilled to welcome our guest today, Rabbi David Seidenberg, who's a fellow neighbor of mine here in Western Massachusetts, where we're coming to you live today, outside on a beautiful, oddly warm, sunny winter day. But it's wonderful to be here and not be wearing masks and enjoying each other's company. For those of you who don't know Rabbi Seidenberg, he's the creator of neohasi.org, an incredible online resource. He's the author of Kabbalah and Ecology. He wrote an incredible article called The Third Promise: Can Judaism's Indigenous Core Help Us Rise Above the Damaging Politics of Our Time? And he's the current Shmitah Scholar-in-Residence at Abundance Farm, which is a Jewish food justice farm, outdoor classroom, and community building space here in Northampton, Massachusetts. So, David, you are really the perfect guest for this. So thank you for joining us.
thank you.
Before we jump in, just a note, if you have questions or comments throughout the conversation, please put them into the chat box there on the page, and we'll try to answer questions, time permitting, after our conversation. So with that, let's get into it. David, I want to ask you to just briefly introduce yourself, but I want to set that up because I've known you for several years, and one of the most beautiful things about you, and you get a sense of this on neohasi.org, is your ability to take very ancient principles and traditions and practices and make them really meaningful in a new and special way in today's world with all the challenges that we're dealing with as a society. And Shmita is one of those, is kind of like the epitome of an ancient practice and set of customs that's still striving, I think, to find like real world identity and value in today's world. So you're really a perfect, guest to talk about this. So can you just start by just introducing yourself and just speaking about what Shmita means to you today?
It's such a big question, but I want to give a little of the history of my exposure, because I first encountered Shmita through Arthur Waskow. He came to my college when I was a freshman, and I'd never heard of it before. And I went all through Hebrew school, all the way through high school. And it really blew my mind. And it made it clear to me that everything about Judaism is what I wanted to tend to. It was the garden I wanted to tend. It's always informed my Shabbat practice as kind of a distant goal of why are we doing this? Because of course Shabbat is the small cycle, the big cycles of Shmita being big Shabbat. And now we weren't facing climate change in the same conscious way. Of course we were, but I'm talking about 1982. And like most people were not even aware of the issues, even though scientists were. And at that point for me, Shmita was about revolutionizing society so we could have radical equality, economic equality between human beings. But every year, over the years, new layers of Shmita come to me and make themselves clear to me. So for example, actually just the past 2 years, what I've been really thinking about is the fact that in the Shmita Year, you're supposed to let the wild animals into your fields. And that could mean all kinds of things, but one thing it means that I didn't realize or think about until recently is that it means breaking down the barriers, the boundaries between wild spaces and human spaces, which actually is so close to what we do in support also. And there's this deep pattern in our tradition about we make spaces, we make the separations, but then we make space to question, we make space to go beyond that. As far as Shmita as an ancient practice, it's interesting to think of it as an ancient practice because we don't even know how much it was observed. And in fact, there's no knowledge, I think, about whether the Jubilee was ever observed. We know some part of the Shmita was observed because the Romans in some years wouldn't tax the Jews in Shmita because they knew they weren't doing work, doing agricultural work. So something was happening, but really Shmita is actually a practice of the future, not the past. How will a world evolve that can observe Shmita? And it's the question of our lives, it's the question of our redemption, it's the question of the future of the planet.
So I mean, that's just saying that, like, it's a practice of the future versus one of the past. I think it's so powerful. You know, and you've been a leader in, you know, the eco-environmental Jewish movement and world, you know, for decades now. So on that point, where have you seen the role and identity of Shmita? How has it evolved? Where are we, like, at this moment? And to your point of, like, it's really a future, where do you see it going?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I started studying Shmita in 1982. I started teaching about it in 1993 because I remember the time. It was very special to me. And at that time, nobody had heard of Shmita. Even observant people, Jews who were keeping Shabbat, had mostly not heard or thought about Shmita. And now, every synagogue has heard about Shmita. Every synagogue is thinking, well, what does it mean that it's a Shmita year? This is the work of the Jewish environmental movement. We created this change, and it grew slowly, slowly. But the last Shmita year, I think, was the first year where almost all rabbis knew it was the Shmita year, and had the question, what does this mean for us? And this is the first one where everyone seems to know it's a Shmita year if they have any connection to the Jewish world. So that's entirely the creation of the Jewish environmental movement. And it's a beautiful creation because we need everyone trying to figure out what do we do with this. How do we make it live? As for the future, you know, we live in a society that's so much structured as the exact opposite of the society that could practice Shmita. And we know that the way our society is structured is feels fine at the moment, often, but is ruinous in the long term. Does not meet a 7 generations test, does not meet the test, Lema'an Tichiyu, that you should do this in order to live, which is our Torah's way of talking about sustainability. So what's the difference in society? What's going to happen? We can imagine small things like nibbling around the edges, like in Israel, they did some remarkable things in the last Shmita year. I haven't heard about them this Shmita, but for example, the last Shmita year, they stopped fishing in the Galilee for the year to give fish a chance to replenish themselves, fish stocks, and you know, just for the ecosystem to replenish itself. And that was wonderful. And I don't know that they're doing that this year, but that's a kind of way where we're going to, it's not agricultural, but we're finding a different way to take a rest and release. We're releasing the seed to be its own thing.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you take something like that. Well, what about the fishermen? What are they doing, and what was done to help them? And a lot of those fishermen might be Palestinian Israelis. Mm-hmm. And so how are they making their living when it's a Jewish practice, it's not their practice? Mm-hmm. So these are all questions that get interesting, complicated. The other really big question, am I going on too long?
No. Go ahead. Okay. But I just want to apologize to anyone. We have a little bit of background noise here just because we're outside, so apologies for that. But we are trying to speak up just to do that. But no, please. No. You're good.
Okay. So we have a Shmita year for farming. Mm-hmm. That was the first Shmita year. That's in Leviticus chapter 25. Mm-hmm. We have a Shmita year for debt. Debts get canceled. That's a later Shmita year responding to a different economic system. Mm-hmm. That's in Deuteronomy 15, I know. I'm getting the number right. What we don't have, and what didn't exist at that time, was an economy based on extracting what people call natural resources from the earth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now that's what we have. Mm-hmm. We have oil. We have, all kinds of stuff, including horribly dangerous things, uranium gets mined, etc. But all the mining, what would a Shmita from extracting from the earth look like? Because it seems to me that even if you released all the things that are meant to be released in the Shmita Year that we've learned from the past, the debts, the land, there's a level of releasing the earth itself, like the innards of the earth, the belly of the earth, as it were. And we don't even have a clue about how to do that yet.
Yeah.
But I know for sure we're not going to make it to the next century if we don't find a way to do that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, I want to get to also your role over at Abundance Farm, because I think that's an amazing situation going on there. But just to stay with that line of thread, I mean, you talked about kind of the environmental piece and the economic piece. And, today, social equity is such a big part of not just the conversation anymore, but really part of our actions, like organizationally, especially this year, Wilderness Torah, and across the spectrum, organizations are really doing some deep reflection. How do we make ourselves as an organization? How do we hold ourselves more accountable? And how do we, really embrace these values and principles of social equity, inclusivity, accessibility? So can you talk a little bit about like that component? Like, what does Shmita offer us in that realm that we can really, kind of work off of today?
Well, the teaching of Shmita, the interpretation of it, Rashi's comment on Leviticus 25 is beautiful. It just says that rich and poor are equal in the Shmita year, meaning we're all sharing the same food. No one's going out to make money. It's a barter economy or a gift economy, depending. Barter economy can be with things that are not Shmita produce. If it's Shmita produce that grows from the land in the Shmita year, it's holy, and you can only use it as a gift. You can't barter with it. Right? So that's even farther beyond kind of a street capitalist market system. Gift economy, which people who go to Burning Man know what that's about to some degree. It seems to me that a society that imagines doing that, that is able to do that, can imagine a world where poverty is not a necessity, where class does not have to mean suffering or loss of opportunities the way it does in our society. How to implement that it's kind of like it ends up being a huge question.
Yeah. And
you have to get kind of all the people in the room to figure it out.
Well, do you have, are there any examples that come to mind where you're seeing like glimpses of hope in your own world of, those social equities like surfacing in ways that they hadn't in the past?
I'll tell you, I'm not sure I can speak directly to the point. Here's an example of something that I've been doing for Shmita this year. And it's based on something that they did 7 years ago in Israel. So 7 years ago in Israel, because you're supposed to cancel debts in Shmita, but most of us don't hold other people's debts nowadays. Like it's held by banks or, different people who try to steal your money from, right?
Right.
Who want to steal your money, right? Whatever. I don't want to go off too much. But so what people were doing was they were lending money to tzedakah organizations.
Right.
And then the debts are not canceled till the end of the Shmita year. I don't know if you knew that. So we have go through a whole year of living Shmita, and then at the end of the year, that's when the debts are canceled. So at the end of the Shmita year, they would then forgive the debt. So it was a loan to the organization, but then they would say, "Oh, we don't want it back." So then they get the mitzvah of helping the organization, and also canceling the debt. Which was, I thought, very clever. And I think from that perspective, the idea that we would lend each other and give to each other in this year of Shmita, intentionally doing it, knowing that we were not expecting to get that money back and that it was going to be canceled. Yeah. That can happen on a person-to-person level, not just on a person-to-organization level. That seems beautiful. I've tried to really increase my giving with that one, for example.
It's beautiful. Well, let's bring in, I want to, just in terms of another real life example, can you talk a little bit about your role at Abundance Farm and how you're helping to bring Shmita into play on the ground over there?
Yeah.
And for folks who don't know Abundance Farm, just give us a little sense of what it is, and yeah, speak to what you're doing on the Shmita realm there.
Abundance Farm is a wonderful educational farm on the grounds of Congregation B'nai Israel. It's been a thriving, expanding organization headed by Jacob Fine, Rabbi Jacob Fine. Lily Sunhai, our beautiful, wonderful friend, is there, masterful educator. We have farmers, Rose, Rebecca. We have great people, and I'm helping them kind of figure out, what does this mean? We study text together, and then we talk about how they're farming and what their practices are. And, farming rules about Shmita are only applicable officially, halachically, in the land of Israel, or in the land of Israel, Canaan, Palestine, whatever name you want to call it, it only applies there. So that is a beautiful thing, because it means we don't have to do anything. We can figure out what we want to do. And it could be new, it could follow the rules, we could make up new rules. We could pick this rule and not that rule, because we're not in the land of Israel. It's really all voluntary. It's an invitation. So Shmita, instead of becoming a commandment for us here, becomes an invitation to try to bring that level of holiness even outside the land of Israel.
Yeah. So what is that looking like for over there at Abundance Farm? What are some other ways you're finding that you're able to actually implement it, or ways that you're thinking about doing that? Because that always seems like the big challenge is like, how do we actually like leverage this principle? So it sounds like you guys have been talking about it. What are some ways that that's playing out?
One way that played out at the beginning of the Shmita Year was that I took down the front gate.
Okay.
Because traditionally you actually do remove the gate so that anyone can go in and out of any field without any sense like, oh, I'm not supposed to be there. Because everyone's supposed to be everywhere, basically, on that level. So that's one thing we did, and it was a whole ritual. We created the gate around it.
Nice.
Yeah. They decided after studying and thinking about it, they wouldn't plant new fruit trees this year. These things, these decisions change as we go along. Obviously.
Yeah.
So one thing that's a beautiful thing, which isn't new for this year, but is kind of newly lit up, is that we have this thing called shared abundance gardens, where they give out signs for people to put in the gardens, their own vegetable garden, saying you can pick from this garden.
Right.
And that's exactly the principle of Shmita, right? Which is you can go to someone else's garden, pick the fruit, take the food, and take it for yourself.
Yeah.
The big rule is you're not supposed to take it in order to sell it, and you're not supposed to hoard it. You take for what you actually need and the people you're caring for actually need. So that's also a different way of thinking about stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to get into some other stuff that you may not ask about. May I?
Sure, go ahead. Okay.
Because there's like a really big picture look at all of this, which is easy to forget, which is our ancestors came up with this idea, our Torah gave us this idea, God gave us this idea of Shmita. It was radical, it was completely radical then, and it's still completely radical now. It's never not been completely radical. So what were they reacting to? What was their vision? There's every reason to think that our ancestors understood that agriculture could destroy the earth. There were civilizations that fell because they ruined their agricultural basis. And that was within historical memory, that was within mythical memory. Our story of Abraham is that he comes from one of those places, Mesopotamia. I believe that Shmita was a vision for how to redirect the course of civilization. And if it had succeeded, we would not be where we are now. We would be in a different world. Shmita was the antidote to what is now become the Anthropocene sixth mass extinction, or one of the antidotes, because of course other people also saw that problem and also found ways to imagine doing things differently. But our ancestors particularly understood agriculture is a sacrament of service to the land. It's not the land serving us, it's us serving the land. And any agriculture that's not done in that spirit is harming the land. The land is a person with rights. By person, I mean in the legal sense, like a standing. Right? Anything that takes us away from understanding the land has rights, that we belong to the land and not to us, and not it to us, not her to us, however you want to talk about the land. is taking us on the course of civilization that we're on now, which is this mass extinction that we are understanding that we're part of, although I don't think we really understood the depth of it yet.
Yeah. I mean, just that concept is, it's both radical and I think is at the heart of what, the environmental Jewish world and land-based Jewish organizations are all about. Just that concept that, we are here to serve the land, and like that concept and how it plays out just gets lost in our larger society today. So the idea that this can kind of be a reminder is a powerful one.
Yeah, there's a whole other dimension to it too, which I think is really stunning. This is, like I say, every Shmita year, every year I learn more about Shmita, I go to new levels.
Yeah.
So it says in Deuteronomy, again, right before the second paragraph of the Shema, where that comes in Deuteronomy, it's chapter 11. It says, the land where you're going to is not like Egypt, where you watered your fields with foot pedal irrigation. But it's a land of hills and valleys that drinks water from the heavens. The eyes of God are continually upon them. Right? And I didn't realize what this meant for a longest time. It means God's always watching to judge whether you deserve rain or not. And the interesting thing about it, the mind-blowing part of it, is our ancestors wanted to be in a position where they would be really judged all the time about whether they deserved rain. And I think, and again, this is me like just trying to imagine what was going on. I think the idea was, if we get judged right away with what's going on, then we will have instant feedback about whether we're doing well or not. We'll have instant feedback about whether we're truly doing justice or not, because our ancestors understood the Torah that says, if you don't do justice, you don't get rain. If you don't do justice, you don't live in the land. And they crave that because the opposite, the alternative, is the world we're in now, which is you keep deferring the consequences of your ecological actions. So now we've deferred the consequences for how many centuries? Depending on how you count it, from the start of agriculture or the start of industry, many centuries. And we keep deferring the consequences. We use our technology to do that.
Yeah.
When the consequences come, it's going to be a tidal wave that is covering the entire planet.
Yeah.
As opposed to consequences for this one place, and then they make a correction.
Yeah.
So our ancestors wanted the opposite.
Yeah.
They wanted that intimacy with God. It came with judgment, but that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
And Shmita was their idea of how can we perfect our system so that we are judged to be living right in relationship to the land, in relationship to the poor, in relationship to the stranger, and in relationship to the animals.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just have a couple minutes left. If there is one thing you feel like for you personally or globally, that where would you like to see the world heading into the next Shmita, right? Like that seems kind of one of the nice things, practically speaking, about Shmita is it's on the 7-year cycle. So as, conceptual as it seems, we actually, from a time standpoint, we're given ample time to actually implement, actions that, are intended to coming out of Shmita. There's really no excuse to at least not get moving on things that you reflect upon during this year. So where if there's one thing you would like to really see yourself or the world implement and be at, 7 years from now as we step into the next Shmita, what would that be?
The first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is what's going to have the biggest impact on climate change, because everything else doesn't matter if we don't deal with that, right? And then the question is, do you want to deal with animal husbandry and the problem with meat eating? Do you want to deal with concrete and the problem with carbon dioxide and construction? Or do you want to deal with the energy grid? But probably, I think if we could transform the energy grid, that's going to transform not just our lives, but our consciousness about our lives enough or deeply enough that the other changes will seem easy in comparison. So that's where I'd like to see us change in that sense. And I think a kind of a Shmita energy grid is one that looks at small scale technologies, not a giant solar farm a mile wide in the desert, but your house and my house roof. And so that it's sort of the small is beautiful philosophy.
Yeah, right. And that makes it brings it all back to each of us individually. There's always something for us to do that's going to add to the global impact. Yeah, beautiful.
I don't want to end without mentioning.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have some liturgy for Shmita.
Okay.
It's linked on the Abundance Farm website.
Okay.
And it's also linked on neoclassic.org. So if anyone wants to go to neoclassic.org, there is near the top, it says Shmita Year, you go to the page, and there is, a lot of stuff there. A lot of great stuff, including resources for teaching and study, songs, liturgy. So one of the things is a harachaman to add to our meals. A harachaman is an extra prayer that you add at the end of any meal. Mm-hmm. You can add it every time you eat. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, they come in Birkat Hamazon after bread, when you bless after bread, but they can come all the time. And we have a wonderful harachaman that I worked on with Neely, and we came up with it last Shmita Year.
In 30 seconds, can you share it with us?
Oh yeah, sure. And there's a song to go with it.
Okay.
I don't know if we have time for the song.
No, we have about 1 minute. So just give us
Harachaman.
Yeah.
Hu yashiv libenu el haaretz. L'ma'an neshiv yachad ima. B'shovta kol shnat hashmita. Now that's the Hebrew. What does it mean? Mm-hmm. The merciful one will turn our hearts back towards the land, so that we can be face to face with the land, as it were, so that we may rest together with her in her year of Shabbat, right? The whole year of Shmita. And so the idea is that somehow we're going to become students of the earth in the Shmita Year, and our hearts are going to be warmed up to what we need to be, who we need to become.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, that's a great thing. Great note to pause on there. We'll add the links both to neohasi.org, the Abundance Farm site, in the chat boxes after this.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So so with that, we're gonna end with this. Thank you again for joining, and it's so wonderful to have this conversation outside, be in person in this Zoom world. It's so nice to
do that. Oh, it's such a machaya.
So from Western Massachusetts to California and beyond, thank you all for joining us for this episode.
Thank you, Bobby. And thank you, Wilderness Torah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Thank you so much.
And join us in 2 weeks, December 30th. We'll have our final episode of the 2021 year before we head into the next Gregorian calendar year. So stay tuned, and thank you again. Have a good day.
Dear